Hi, my name is Ella, and I am a domestic violence survivor. Before I continue with this podcast, I would just like to give a trigger warning here. This podcast discusses domestic violence, abuse, trauma, and the harm experienced by women and children. Some listeners may find the content distressing, so please take care and be kind to yourself. You may stop and come back to the podcast as you see fit. I want this podcast to be about the lack of accountability for domestic violence crimes, because to me, accountability is a very broad issue that covers so many different areas and problems, mainly weak laws and failures in the legal system, lack of safe housing, poor victim support, financial abuse, coercive control, stalking, psychological abuse, and the loss of survivors and their children is insurmountable. And for many years, I pushed the trauma to the back of my mind where it stayed unresolved while I tried to live, in inverted commas, my life. But trauma doesn't simply disappear on its own. It waits patiently, haunting you quietly in the background until eventually it demands your full attention. And that's where I feel I am right now in my life, trying to give it my full attention and focus on what I see is one of the most outrageous crimes being perpetrated every day across every country, while perpetrators face minimal justice. And trauma like this eats away at your soul. It certainly has for me, but I've been in therapy for quite a few years, and it does help, but the healing has been excruciatingly slow. But it is possible, so there's always that. And I think anyone that's been through domestic violence needs to know that there is help out there. There are a lot of organisations ready to help with at least therapy. So I think everyone that's been through domestic violence and their children should definitely get as much therapy as they possibly can, because there's so many damaging aspects that are the after effects of each abuse that you've suffered. The physical healing may improve, but the emotional and the psychological and the financial issues take years and years to heal. I once read that living through domestic violence can be similar to being a soldier on a battlefield, constantly living in fear, survival mode, and hypervigilance. And looking back, I believe that this comparison is very accurate. Like many women living with domestic violence, especially when children are involved, you live in a survival mode every minute of every day because your focus becomes simply getting through that day with your children safely. And that is no way to live. That is just existing. And for me, therapy and counselling, support services, and real assistance barely existed at the time that I was going through my domestic violence issues. This was many, many years ago. And at that time, domestic violence was not even recognised as a crime. So I know we've come a long way, but have we really? That would be my question for this first podcast on accountability. But anyway, my children were very young and they suffered greatly. What still stays with me is that the perpetrator never once said sorry. There was never any accountability, remorse, or acknowledgement of the pain and damage he caused our family. And I'm tired of seeing the accountability gap in domestic violence where perpetrators aren't truly held accountable while survivors are the ones left carrying the trauma and the damage. And around the world, millions of women are survivors of domestic violence. The World Health Organization estimates that nearly 1 in 3 women globally have experienced physical or sexual violence. Yet despite the scale of it, accountability still feels rare, inconsistent, and, in my opinion, meaningless. Even in countries where domestic violence laws already exist, victims are still being failed every day. In the UK, official reports have found that victims are being failed at almost every stage of the justice system, from police response times through to courts, probation services. And Women's Aid UK also found that only a small percentage of women and children seeking refuge and support were actually able to access it. In Australia, where my domestic violence situation occurred, domestic violence continues to be linked to a significant number of assaults and homicides every year. And many women still report feeling ignored, unsupported, unsafe. There's no support, there's no help for them to navigate the legal system. It's atrocious, actually. But this week in Australia, another horrific domestic violence tragedy claimed the lives of a woman and 2 young children in Sydney. And cases like this keep happening over and over again, and every time they do, communities and societies just ask the same questions. Could more have been done? Should more have been done? Were there any warning signs? And why are women and children still not safe in their own homes? Well, Are we, as women, not angry enough to have our voices heard and taken seriously? It's staggering, the cases, that they're just horrific. Children, especially children, are being murdered. I mean, they try to sugarcoat the word murdered by saying, they were, it claimed the lives of 2 children. They were murdered. Simple, they were murdered. And we, as a society, have to do something urgently to stop this. And realistically, where are the men? Where are the men from these communities and societies and countries? Why aren't they all out on the streets protesting against these horrific murders? Take a deep breath. Anyway, there's been so many awareness campaigns from European countries and Canada, US, UK, flashing across, they're on the TV stations, they're in newspapers, they're online, social media, but they're not getting through. They are not stopping men from committing these crimes. So something more has to be done now, not next week, now. These campaigns that have been taking place, say roughly for the last 20 years, some policy changes happened because of them, and some governments allocated special ministers for women and children, etc., but nothing is changing, nothing is happening in a positive way for the survivors or to stop the crimes happening at all. And this concerns me greatly. One of the things that's happening in Australia right now too is the fact that the bail laws and system failures are being scrutinised, which they should be, because there was an alleged offender, Julian Ingram, who reportedly had previous domestic violence allegations and protection orders against him before he went out and killed his former partner and others earlier this year. But cases like this come up all the time, and not just in Australia. And when they come up, people are outraged, the police are outraged, politicians are outraged, and they promise all the funds needed to stamp out this scourge from societies. But it doesn't happen. It's not happening. I don't know where all the money goes for all these activities and services and so-called professionals that are supposed to be stepping up and stopping the murders. I just don't understand, with millions and millions and millions of dollars being poured into domestic violence, I've noticed that in Australia they are increasing funding quite drastically to the tune of, I think it's about $1 billion over the next 4 or 5 years. However, in the same article, I see that the frontline services for domestic violence support saying that $1 billion won't be enough. And this is in a country that has approximately 30 million people. $1 billion over 4 years is not enough. Well, that says something very frightening. The UK has increased funding for domestic violence services. However, once again, I'm seeing that the funding, which is also tipped to be around £1 billion, so that's close to 2 billion Australian dollars over the next 5 years. However, we have roughly 70 million people, and frontline services are also saying that this is not enough money. The USA currently 2025-2026 domestic violence budget has been cut by $1.1 billion across 367 domestic violence services. Staggering, unbelievable, just, unforgivable. Those statistics. Some people say that all this extra funding is great because, more people are reporting these crimes. But as a survivor, I know that even though more people are reporting these crimes, the vast majority of victims never report their crimes for various reasons that I'd like to delve into a little bit more, probably in the next podcast. But so to see the irony there, it's government saying we're giving you all this extra money for all these extra services, and it's great because we're seeing so many more people reporting the crimes and getting help. But the truth is that's not actually correct. And also they seem to be forgetting or selectively choosing not to acknowledge the fact that most domestic violence victims do not report their crimes. So something is very wrong with the whole system here. And when I think about crimes and criminals in society, you think when most crimes are committed, society expects perpetrators to be held accountable and punished, which is fair. But with domestic violence, it's often treated very differently. many people and even some governments still fail to